Hello, beautiful bookish people. My name is Hannah, and today we're talking about Jane Austen. Yep, that's me. So, yes, today I have a lovely guest that knows a ton about Jane Austen, probably more than me, and we're going to be going through the catalog of Jane Austen's work, saying if you liked this book by Jane Austen, you'll probably like this book. But today I'm joined with Cara from Wild Book Garden. Would you want to do maybe an intro, like your name, where you're from, and maybe your favorite book?
Hi everybody, so my name is Kara. My channel is Wild Book Garden. I live in California, and because I've been put on the spot, I'm gonna say I get to choose two favorite books. I think right now those would probably be The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, because I am basic.
Oh,
And also Blanca Iroha by Anne-Marie McLemore, who is one of my favorite authors, and I think that's my favorite book of theirs.
But today is kind of just going to be a general discussion of Jane Austen, giving you some book recommendations, and just maybe gushing about Mr. Knightley, which is my favorite. But yeah, you said you had like one that you wanted to start with, or maybe you had like a certain order.
Yeah, so when we were kind of planning this, the order that I wrote them down in is the order that Jane Austen wrote them in, because that just is what came to my mind. And I think it's kind of interesting to like chronologically chart an author's work. I think that's very interesting. So if we want to do it that way, we would be starting with Northanger Abbey, everyone's favorite Gothic parody. Do you want to go first, since this is kind of your project?
Oh, I can. So when I think of Northanger Abbey, obviously I think of Gothic literature, I think of angst, I think about a writer writing about a writer. Like Catherine is very, I don't want to say ditzy, but she's very like innocent, but then you go further into the novel and you realize she has like more inner strength than you probably have given her credit for. So the book that I chose for Northanger Abbey was The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, which I literally just read. I just finished and I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect, because it has like the Gothic setting. It gives you a perspective on a character that you wouldn't normally think about, because this is following Victor Frankenstein's intended wife and her journey of like what was going on with her life versus like when Victor was creating the monster. So it's a little bit of a mystery. It's a little bit of talking about being like the side character of your own story a little bit. We've talked about how we feel like feminism doesn't have to be like breaking the glass ceiling all the time. Sometimes feminism is just moving in a system and like cleverly like moving what you can do and what you can't do. And I think that's what Elizabeth does really well. And I think Catherine does that too, even with the advice from Mr. Tilney. So that was my pick. What did you have in mind for Catherine and Mr. Tilney?
So for my pick, one of the things that I was thinking about for Northanger Abbey is like how focused that book is on other books, especially like Gothic romances and this very like over the top kind of storytelling. So the book that I think like brings those things together really well is actually like a childhood favorite of mine that I don't really hear people talk about.
Oh.
This is Mabel Riley, A Reliable Record of Humdrum, Peril, and Romance by Martha Jocelyn. So I think this has a lot of similarities with Northanger Abbey. Like our main character Mabel is very similar to Catherine, I feel like, because she's kind of like exploring life and kind of trying to treat it as a novel. And we actually get excerpts of these melodramatic stories that she writes, which I think are a ton of fun. And I also feel like Mabel and Catherine are pretty similar in some ways. I feel like they would get along really well, and I enjoy the way that she like really loves writing and just storytelling in general. So yeah, that's my pick. The next one would be Sense and Sensibility.
Oh, I always forget it's like one of her first novels. Since I went first last time, do you want to?
Sure. Okay.
Time for recommendation for Sense and Sensibility.
Yeah. So this is one of the more like mainstream picks. I think like a lot of people already know about this series, and I picked To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han.
Oh, wait, interesting.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of emphasis on sister relationships.
For sure.
And there's also very messy romance plots that are very divisive among readers of the series.
True,
um,
true.
yeah, so that's kind of like a meta reason I feel like this one works. But I also feel like the tone is very similar to me because like Sense and Sensibility, there's a lot of humor in it. Like it's definitely, I think, a comedy of manners kind of book, but there's all this underlying content about poverty and about women not having financial options. It's like a comedy that has some like darker stuff underneath it, which I think Jane Austen does a lot. And I feel like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, like people tend to think of them as like a light and fluffy series, which I think they are, but I think there's like things happening underneath that. Like I think the way that grief is shown throughout the series, like the girls who have lost their mother, and that feels very present throughout the series. Anyway, this is my pick, this series for Sense and Sensibility. I feel like if you like the novel or if you like this series, you could try the other one and enjoy it.
But the one that I choose, or I chose for Sense and Sensibility, is one I kind of talk about often enough, I feel. And it's Little Do We Know by Tamara Ireland Stone. So this is about two best friends who kind of get in a fight at the very beginning. And so we're slowly like discussing what it means to be a friend, and it has like that duality moment I think that Sense and Sensibility has, because the two friends are like, one is a theater major and very passionate and loves her boyfriend, and the other one is like this, like the daughter of a preacher man. Very like Eleanor-esque, very quiet, self like reserved. And so it follows them as they are kind of tackling their first loves of their life, and it's messy. But at the end of the day, I think Sense and Sensibility is like how these two people are falling in love, and how sisterhood can kind of separate and you still have this like true bond with the other person. But I think like Little Do We Know is kind of the opposite of like how people and relationships are interchangeable, but like you can always come back to people. But I think if you like one, you're gonna like the other. I think it's great. Also, there's a character named Hannah.
So we know it's good.
Yeah, obviously. So, what would be the next one?
The next one is Pride and Prejudice.
Oh.
Okay, so I feel like this one is maybe not as imaginative as some of these are, but I had to pick it because it just works so well in my opinion. So I paired a classic with another classic. And I went with Much Ado About Nothing because like you cannot beat, in my opinion, Pride and Prejudice and Much Ado About Nothing. You cannot beat the like OG hate to love vibes that they both have. Like the banter in both of these is so good. And I also feel like thematically there's some similarities. Pride and Prejudice is a really romantic and light novel, and a lot of people think it's her most fun, and I think it's a lot of fun. But there's a lot of, again, like social commentary on classism and the way that women are punished for things in society. And Much Ado About Nothing has that too. So even though like overall these are comedies, I think there's a lot at play. And actually, this one kind of comments on similar themes, I think, that Pride and Prejudice does. Anyway, that was very rambly, but I love it.
I think also, like, in my opinion, like what Shakespeare and probably Austen have in common is they're both really good at like leaning into stereotypes and kind of exploiting them to like produce humor. Like there's a really like minor character, like I forget his name, it's like called Dog something.
Oh, Dogberry. He's
Dogberry.
nuts.
And like everything that comes out of his mouth is wrong. And it's called like malapropisms, where it's like a word that sounds similar to another word, but you're using it incorrectly.
Yeah.
And I think Jane Austen is very good at that. There's a lot of times when Jane Austen will like lean into like in Pride and Prejudice, like Mr. Collins is very much like leaning into a stereotype and making fun of them. Yeah. Even like Mrs. Bennet too, to a certain extent. Yeah. I was most nervous about Pride and Prejudice recommending in a book, because like what can compare to Pride and Prejudice? I'm still a little nervous about it.
We're here for you, Han.
But I think people are gonna judge me. Because for Pride and Prejudice is actually The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren.
Oh.
I think it has like the banter, it has like the enemies to lovers, and surprisingly it has like the family dynamic that not a whole lot of people talk about like at the third act. But instead of like Darcy saving the day and you have like this moral conflict, you have our main protagonist Olive like really at the centerfold trying to convince people like what she says is true. But I think it has like the conversations of like Elizabeth Bennet, but like more subtly, because Olive is very like down on herself. There's this whole conversation about how like Ethan confronts her about like, are you actually like having bad luck or is it just your own mindset? But there is also like sort of like financial discussions. Like Ethan is very wealthy. I think it makes sense to me why the unhoneymooners would go with Pride and Prejudice, but I do feel like it's just so hard to recommend things for Pride and Prejudice. What would be the next one? That would be Emma?
No.
Mansfield?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one is Mansfield Park. Okay. But when I think of like Mansfield Park, I think of like Fanny and her like unwielding ethics and kind of the aspect of you're kind of pushed into this family, like you're technically family, but you're not really family, and like just observing the rich. The book I picked for that is Even in Paradise, which is also a pretty underrated book. So it follows this girl named Charlotte, and Charlotte gets involved with this girl named Jules, who's like very rich, like owns a beach house. And so what ends up happening is they take in Charlotte for the summer, and she ends up falling for Jules's brother. Like I think that like a Jane Austen novel, like what people talk about the most is the romance, but at the forefront is like, to me, this really strong female friendship that's done really well. And it's very methodical because like there's not really a plot. It's just like you're going through life with them. So in my mind, there's like a lot of correlations of between these two of like kind of a found family taking in somebody. They're not family, but you still love them like family. And then like truly like analyzing like character studies. So I really love this book.
I am gonna check that one out. That sounds really good.
But this one's really good. And it's also really pretty. Look at that spine.
So this is the one in the stack where I was like, I'm gonna need to explain this a lot because on the surface it's very strange, but I have a lot of reasons, so
Okay.
I think it works. So the one I picked is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. And so this book, for the most part, you're following Nannerl, who is Amadeus Mozart's sister, and she was a real person. And she was really, really talented, but we don't have a lot of information about her because of sexism. And because women were not allowed to compose. So like, we don't even really have any of her music, but we know that she was really talented and that her brother thought she was, I think he wrote in a letter that she was like more talented than he was, which is like obviously high praise. The Kingdom of Back, I think, is also like kind of similar to Mansfield Park in that it's very slow and kind of like the feeling and the characters are more important than what actually happens. I also think like the antagonist element kind of reminds me of each other because I think in The Kingdom of Back and in Mansfield Park, the antagonist is like a really interesting element of the story.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like them, I think the book would not have worked as well without them. But one thing that I think really is similar with The Kingdom of Back and Mansfield Park is the way that the ending leaves people very unsatisfied. It's more about what the main female character decides for herself than what we want for her. They're similar in that like we kind of want better for her than she wants for herself, if that makes sense. Anyway, so this is like my weird pick, but I think it works.
So too. So the next one, that makes it Emma, because I do know that Persuasion is last.
Yes. So I'll go ahead and go first, if that's okay. And like we were talking about, I think we both had trouble with this one. It's like it was a very hard one for me to pick. So the things I was thinking about with Emma is there's like this female lead who is in a lot of ways quite unlikable, very annoying. And I picked Puddin' by Julie Murphy. So this is the companion book to Dumplin'. And so this, we have two main characters. So we have Millie, who was in the first book, who I love. She's just the sweetest bean and she deserves the world. And then we have Callie, who was like also in the first book, but she wasn't in it that much. She was just kind of an antagonist. And she's like a preppy mean girl, kind of. The reason that I think of this book for Emma is I feel like Millie is kind of similar to Harriet in that she's just like the sweetest and you just want good things for her. And Callie does remind me of Emma in like their personality and how they both kind of have to realize that like other people have feelings. And I actually like the friendship between Millie and Callie is what I would have wanted from Emma and Harriet, because that I don't think that part was done as well, which is why I don't love Emma as much. It's very much like a focused character plot, which I think is like definitely Emma. It's like basically this one village and everybody getting messy and getting in each other's business. So yeah, that's why I think this one works.
Nice. So when I think of Emma, I think we've talked about this of like put the character of Emma in any other Jane Austen novel and she would be the villain.
Yeah.
She's like the snooty upper class one that doesn't really think of anybody's feelings. I also think kind of a love interest that calls her out. So this is a book that kind of does a lot of that, where we're kind of in the head of someone who's just mean. And that's How to Break a Boy by Lori DeVore. It's kind of what I think Austen is trying to do with Emma is get inside the head of someone she hasn't before and like trying to explain their reasonings and why they are the way that they are. And I don't think Austen ever justifies Emma.
Yeah.
It's just an exploration of like who she is as a person. And like, not that she's a good person, it's just like, here's why she did the things. And I think Lori DeVore does that too, because How to Break a Boy basically follows like the archetype of like a Regina George in Mean Girls. Like she's just an awful person. She's so mean. She's so petty to her best friends. And it kind of explores like toxic friendship. I didn't go your route with Harriet, but like how that can just like consume your life and how you're always trying to like better the person and how like that environment will just like tear you down mentally. So we begin the novel and we find out her best friend is cheating on her with her boyfriend. And so we get into a quick relationship with another guy to make the other two jealous. But this other guy turns out to be really good and does call her out on like all the petty stuff that she does. And like Emma, I just think it's an exploration of mean characters because like she is so unlikable. A lot of like petty girl drama, and I think to a certain extent Emma is that too.
Yeah, she really is. Yeah, Emma's kind of the bully.
Yeah, I think How to Break a Boy is like if you're looking for like that unlikable protagonist, and we're never justifying their behavior, but it's just an exploration of mean people and maybe why mean people lash out.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. I don't know how else to transition, but we only have one more book to talk about, which is Persuasion. So when I think of Persuasion, I think of longing, I think of angst, I think of social mobility and miscommunication. When I think of like those things, I think it was really obvious for me because one of my favorite books of 2020 was Normal People by Sally Rooney, and I think those two books kind of go perfectly together. But Normal People is about this girl named Mary Ann and Connell who are kind of hometown sweethearts, and they start a relationship that is just, I guess, friends with benefits would be like the best term. And that is until Marianne goes to college and Connell kind of follows her there. But you can see like the social mobility aspect change because Connell comes from a kind of poorer side of privilege, and Marianne comes from a very wealthy family. So in high school, Connell is the more popular one. That is until Marianne goes to college, and you can see like their privilege almost shift based just purely on their social economical standpoint. And so it's all about these two people like trying to figure out and be on the same page and talking about books and literature and like wanting to say things but not wanting to put pressure on the other person because of the things that they want to say. And I don't know, in my mind they just like worked so perfectly.
So when I was thinking about Persuasion, like I think of it as it's a story about second chances. And it's a very like quiet kind of hopeful story. That one of the reasons it's so, I think, happy is Anne finding people who treat her the way she deserves. I also thought about how like Persuasion, like we talked about with a lot of, well, like all of Jane Austen's novels, as being like really heavy on the social commentary, and not heavy-handed, just like it has a lot of social commentary in it. And so those were all kind of the things I was thinking about. And the one I picked is like one of my go-to comfort reads, and that is The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Who also, of course, wrote Anne of Green Gables and Emily's New Moon and a lot of other things. This is my favorite from her. Like, it's just like very, I think, modern in the way it approaches certain social issues, which I really liked. And another thing that Valency does is she's kind of had this like casual crush on this guy in their town who's like, he's kind of known as like being the bad boy, but he's not really. But like their relationship is really lovely, and I feel like the yearning is also very Persuasion. Yeah, so that was my gushing about the Blue Castle. Again, I think it does some like social issues like really well, especially for the time period. So yeah, this is what I paired Persuasion with, and this was like one of the easiest ones to think of.
I think we just both like yearning is what that kind of concludes this video. So thank you, Cara, for joining me. This was a lovely discussion about Jane Austen, yearning, and angst, which
Yes.
are three of my favorite topics to discuss. But I'm going to have Cara's links in the description. Definitely go check her out. She's great. Obviously has amazing underrated book recommendations. But I think that concludes this video. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Keep reading and all that jazz. Really? Will Herondale didn't steal your heart?
He did not.
Wow.
No, not yet. I don't know, but just from the way you were acting, I thought
was it going to be Twilight?
I thought you were gonna say Twilight. No, it's fine. I always want to talk about Henry Crawford.
But it's not. I think we're gonna have to restate that.
I have a Jane Austen action figure. If you want me to